Well, good morning. It's February 21st, 2020. I'm sitting here with retired firefighter John McCarthy, who's not only retired from Ottawa Fire Department, but also from the former Rideau Township. Good morning, John.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. John, I just want to find out a little bit about you. It's a great way of doing it through interviews, and I have this wonderful opportunity today. So, first of all, it's always good to know the age. How old are you, John?
I'm 70 years old. Just turned 70. My family threw this fantastic 1-month birthday party for me.
Oh, well, happy birthday, and I'm glad you're able to do this. So, John, tell us a little bit about your younger years on the fire department. What inspired you to get on the fire department? What sort of things led up to you getting on the fire department? Were there any other careers that you thought about?
So I graduated from high school in the middle of 1969, and I started working for E.B. Eddy, and I was promised to be a maintenance electrician, but I ended up in the labor pool, and although I enjoyed working the weekends with the millwrights, it didn't work out. So I left there and started working for the city of Ottawa in December of 1969. And I started with the traffic department, and I built signalized traffic lights because I had a history in electricity that I took through school. So that was very interesting work. But after working there 4 or 5 years, I was repairing meters on the market, and got to talk to the superintendent of the market stalls, and he said, well, did you ever think about getting on the police department or the fire department? And I said, no, I never really thought about it. Although down the end of our street on Hinton Avenue, there was Ed Butler was on the fire department, and he was a man I respected quite a bit. Big bull of a man, hardworking. So I started the process of trying to get on the fire department. It took a few years. You can't just fill out an application and get on the fire department. Did the process, ended up starting in August of 1974, the same month my son was born. So I have a wonderful benchmark. As old as he is exactly the number of years I started the fire department that many years ago.
A couple of beautiful gifts back then.
At the same month. It was absolutely amazing. Left one job, went on to the other, which was pretty scary because when I was working for the city, I was making a pretty good salary with overtime and everything, and then you went on the fire department. In the 1970s, you took quite a hit in pay, became a probationary firefighter, and then worked your way up through the ranks after 4 years to become a first-class firefighter. So it was, we went to drill school. There was 6 of us. And when we graduated drill school, we spent the first year going to 4 different stations, and it was quite an amazing experience. And I remember one of the first stations I went to was old number 5 on Saint Laurent Boulevard. And when you say old number 5, that's a firefighting term for the station before the station. And now that I'm 70 years old and retired for 10 years, some of the stations you have to go old, which means 2 or 3 before, but when you're talking to somebody who's 85 years old, like my buddy Peter, then it's old. And then nobody has any idea where the stations were, and usually people's memories are bad and they forget. But old number 5 on Saint Laurent Boulevard, Johnny Morrell was the captain, and Dave Moffat, who's just passed away, and we're going to have his celebration of life tomorrow. Yep, Dave Moffat was there, and he was quite the character, let me tell you. So I remember leaving work in the morning. I had this little wee tiny 4-cylinder car, and I thought, well, I got off 5 or 10 minutes ahead of him, so I'm going to beat it down Saint Laurent Boulevard, heading towards my house in cars, and there's no way he's going to catch me. He had this beautiful Z28 Camaro, Sunday morning, 6:30 in the morning, and I'm going like heck down Saint Laurent Boulevard, heading south, and I come over around Belfast Road, and there's quite a lift there going across, and he's coming down hell-bent for leather behind me. I go over, and I turn around, and I look back, and there's David coming over this rise, And it was just like that movie in Los Angeles where they come over the rise and comes down and it scrapes all the undercarriage of the car. He was one crazy fool, that guy. Nice man though, did everything, and one heck of a firefighter. I remember a fire that I was at with him. We were in the basement of a high-rise building around Montreal Road and Saint Laurent Boulevard. And I'm crawling around with my breathing apparatus on. And I come to this, I bump into something, and I feel it, and it's firefighter's boots. So I climb up the boots, and it's the tall boots, and then I find the old black coat, and I climb up the coat, and there he is in the smoke where you can't see the hand in front of your face, and he's telling me, he says, "Young lad, the fire is over there." He was directing me to where the fire was, no breathing apparatus on, nothing, and he just stood there. But that's the kind of character that he was. Back in the 70s, you had one breathing apparatus on the truck, and that's all there was. So that was Daisy Moffat and the 1974 when I started. Then I ended up at number 2 station, Bay and Lisgar, which is probably, let me see, old 2, because the new one on Preston Street, well, it's not even called number 2 anymore. It's called 12?
11.
11. So anyway, Bay and Lisgar, and boy, in the 70s, they were renovating the market area and parts of Ottawa, and you would sometimes change shift on the apron of the station and just go right back out. You had to bring a brown bag lunch with you because you would go from one fire to the next fire to the next fire. It was just, that part of the city was burning down with the old type of construction that was there. And I remember Dave Logan, I was looking at a picture the other day of the crew from number 2, and I remember Dave Logan at another fire, and he had the sledgehammer, and about then we all had breathing apparatus on, but we still had the black coats and the tall boots. And this door, a steel door and a steel frame, which were particularly tough to breach, and he had the sledgehammer. And he hit that door so hard with that sledgehammer that the breathing apparatus on the back of his back came apart and the bottle fell to the floor, the bracket. They were old Scots at the time, but they're pretty tough stuff, and he was hitting that door so hard with that sledgehammer. Anyway, just another memory that popped into my mind. So that was what early firefighting was like for me.
Do you remember the names of the six recruits that were hired at the same time? Do you remember their names?
Now, Bill Orange, John Gagnon, myself, and you know what? The others are just escaping me right now. One guy changed careers in the first year, so I wouldn't remember his name. Elected official's son was another guy. I just can't think of his name. Francis, no. Anyway, it's escaping me.
Now, the interesting thing, John, is you were full-time with the City of Ottawa, and then also volunteered within this community of Manotick, or back then it was Rideau Township, at the fire station right here in the village of Manotick. And that must have been interesting, because if you were off and you got a call in the middle of the night as a volunteer and then had to go to work the next day with Ottawa, there wasn't much time for sleep.
No, and then at the end of my career with the fire service, I'm suffering some physical damages, and some of it can be attributed to sleep deprivation, which we all suffered working shift work, but it was exaggerated when you chose to volunteer some of your time with your community. Listen, I'm no good as a hockey coach. I can't coach baseball, I can't coach basketball or football, but how do you help out in the community you live in? So in 1988, about 88, we lived south of the village of Cars, down by the Baxter Conservation Area, and we moved into the thriving metropolis of Manotick. And the reason we chose Manotick to move in was because we had 2 young children, not so young, 10 years old or so at the time, and we were depriving them of, having kids next door that you go and play with, and running the streets on your bicycle, and so on and so forth. So we decided to move into the village, and we moved into Manotick, and they didn't have to change schools. So when I came in here, I looked at volunteering my services with the volunteer fire department, which you sort of volunteer, sort of part-time on-call paid. So I was an ideal candidate in so much as I had some experience and I was available during the day, because one of the challenges with a volunteer fire service is all the members have full-time jobs, and so typically from 8 to 5 during any day they are not around to answer fire calls. So I went through the training. It was quite the training. I remember the fire hall was down here in the middle of the village, and it was an old meat locker that they jammed the trucks into. But the interesting part to me, being a career firefighter, was that they had a cistern in the basement that they could fill their tankers from. And the cistern was the basement of whatever this place was, and it had thousands and thousands and thousands of gallons of water in it, because at the time in the rural you had no water supply. So you had to bring it with you, or you had to go drill holes in the ice in the wintertime and supply. So during my career with the volunteers, the volunteers in Rideau Township Station number 2 actually devised some very clever ways of implementing water supply for rural settings. One was the long laneway lay, which I believe they still use today, and the other one was using usually the second pump was put at water source, and usually it was a pump that was 25 years old, and it could pump water efficiently, but typically they would use a small pump at a water source to supply. And the portable pumps were very limited in the amount that they could supply, so it would take a long time to fill the tanker. So we utilized the old pump to, we used a flow-through system where we would hook it up with the 2.5s to supply the pump, and then the hard suction would go into the porta-tank. So when you had it in pump gear and the tanker was being filled, it would be the capacity of that pump to fill the tanker.